Hello everybody and welcome to the 12th International Journal of Nautical Archaeology webinar, which has been made possible thanks to funding with the Honor Frost Foundation. The structure of this online session, much like our previous 11 webinars, will be that we'll have a presentation of approximately 30 minutes or so, then followed by a question and answer session. You can submit your questions by typing them into the Q&A pane or the chat of the control panel in Teams. You can do this at any time, of course, during the presentation when your question comes to mind. We'll collect those up and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. The webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube next week, so you can watch it again or tell your friends and colleagues to tune in. So I will now hand you over to the journal editor, Dr. Athena Trakadas, to introduce today's speaker. Athena, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark, and welcome everyone again to the IJNA 12th webinar. And we're very pleased today that our guest speaker is Dr. Stefania Manfio, and she's an independent maritime archaeologist and researcher specializing in GIS, historical archaeology, and maritime anthropology. And she has her PhD in archaeology from Stanford University. And she collaborates with the Mauritius Marine Conservation Society and designed and coordinated the GIS platform documentation there for regional shipwrecks. And this work began in 2017 under a National Geographic grant. And so building upon this project, this established spatial baseline, she became a core researcher and member of a joint group of Mauritian underwater cultural heritage, the MUCH project, the collaboration between Stanford University and the government of Mauritius. So within this MUCH framework, she oversees and co-directs surveys and field operations to train local stakeholders in underwater survey, technical excavation, and artifact cataloging. With over 15 years of underwater fieldwork experience, she has directed multiple international maritime archaeological missions, and notably she led the 2023 underwater excavation of the slave ship Victoire, 1804, and along with the SDSS, directed operations for the Battle of the Agadi Islands project in 2025 in Sicily. She also remains an active scientific collaborator with the Archéologie de la Praterie project conducting fieldwork in Madagascar. So today we're going to hear her talk on unearthing the material realities about excavations and narratives of the Mauritian slave trade. And the paper upon which her talk is based is open access, I believe until the end of July. So please do visit the IJNA website if you're interested, and you can read a lot more about what she'll be speaking about in this paper. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Stefania. Welcome.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Athena. So before we dive into this presentation, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the organizer for inviting me to speak today. So the study that I'm presenting today is particularly close to my heart, as it was a core part of my PhD project, focusing on the material realities of the maritime slave trade in the Indian Ocean, using Mauritius as a case study. I'm specifically choosing this image, as you can see from my presentation, not only to show the beauty of this island, but especially because this shows Le Morne, a site inscribed by UNESCO commemorating resistance to slavery. So where are we? So Mauritius is a small island in the Indian Ocean, and its location made a vital stopover for ships traveling between Europe, Asia, and Africa. Also, before delving into the research, I want to give you a brief background to Mauritius' unique and complex history. So Mauritius had no indigenous population. Arab merchants are said to have visited the island since the 13th century, but it was only in 1506 that the Portuguese visited Mauritius and started to use it as a refreshing post. This is what we know for the archival research, of course. After that, Mauritius experienced 3 phases of colonialism, and then was transformed during the French period into a hyper-profitable sugarcane plantation colony. So this transition required vast influx of forced labor. So now, to transport the large numbers of enslaved individuals needed to fuel this colonial economy, the slave ship became a crucial, I have to say yet horrific tool. Without it, this massive movement of people would never have been possible. So when we talk about slave ships, I think that for most of you, this image comes to mind. So, however, this is a ship dedicated to the Atlantic traffic. When I initiated my PhD project, what I was asking was, what did the slave ship look like in the Indian Ocean? What was the situation there? What was the network put on place? So we know that the Indian Ocean slave trade was highly complex because it was existed long before the transatlantic trade. It was involving a multitude of global actors, including European, Arab, Indian, and Swahili traders. And the enslaved people were transported all over this region. So it was characterized by a much more heterogeneous network. However, when the Europeans arrived, they intensified this already existing trade. In particular, you have to think that what they did, they transferred a significant number of individuals. And we can say around 86% of the entire traffic to the Mascarene Islands, like Mauritius. So for around 150 years, more than 160,000 enslaved people were brought to Mauritius, mainly from Mozambique and Madagascar. And as this map displays, people were brought from many different regions, not only from Madagascar or the West Africa, but also from India and Southeast Asia. So this map shows you, again, the centrality of Mauritius on the Indian Ocean trade. And you have to think that everything needed to establish a sustained colony from people, livestock, materials, arrived via the sea routes. So because the ships were the very engines of this global exchange, they wrecks that often happen because severe cyclones or naval battles or human mistakes now represent our most valuable submerged archive. As Athena introduced me, to truly grasp this magnitude of this underwater heritage, since 2017, I have co-developed a central GIS database for Mauritius alongside local expert Jan von Army. So this comprehensive database is the direct result of extensive mapping and cataloging of shipwrecks records found from historical archives. It is important to note that this contains both the shipwrecks we have already physically located and verified underwater, as well as those that are potentially still underwater waiting to be discovered. So for those interested in our methodology and the integration of the historical and archaeological data, here we have published an article. And also crucially, as I said, this work was being developed in collaboration with Jan von Army, the local maritime archaeologists, and then this work has been shared with the Department for Continental Shelf, which successfully integrated our archaeological data directly into their national marine spatial planning. I want to just show you a snapshot of how the situation looked like. So up to now, we have mapped approximately 1,390 shipwrecks, and this is their geospatial location around the Republic of Mauritius. And here we have a snapshot just of Mauritius. So thanks to this mapping, we can have a better understanding of kind of shipwreck where we have. And for me, when I started the PhD, the shipwrecks that were involved in the slave trade. So we have published an article back to the 2020 to stress the importance of studying slave shipwrecks in the Indian Ocean. So when I started, we found 11 shipwrecks connected with the slave trade, and 2 were already being thoroughly investigated. One was the Saint Jean and the other was the Clear. So the Saint-Geran is a French East Indian representing early slave trading activity and colony expansion back to the 1744. And then the other is the Courier, and it is an illicit slave trader. The Saint-Geran, wrecked in 1744, as I said, provides a crucial insight into the early period of the French East India Company and its need on enslaved labor to build the colony's infrastructure. So it was a ship that was carrying many goods and colony and enslaved people. Differently, we have the Courier, that was a lugger that sank in 1821 while attempting to evade British naval fleet tasked with suppressing the illegal slave trade. So the Courier is a fundamental site because it was one of the first slave shipwrecks to undergo a full-scale underwater excavation in Mauritius, an effort led by the Ambon Army between 2004 and 2009. So for my thesis, the PhD, the Courier served as primary comparative case, and we see later. But the most important part of this shipwreck's history is represent the clandestine operation following abolition. So this shipwrecks was performing activity while the slave trade was already abolished in 1806. And during the excavation, our colleagues found interesting artifacts connected with this illegal trade. For example, several iron rings that are possible chain links, but the most important were two small lead discs with a hole at one edge. And probably, if I'm not wrong, one of these lead was bearing a number 56, if I recall well. And these tags were usually placed around the neck on enslaved for identification purpose. So while I was in Mauritius for my field work to study the material of these shipwrecks, we were looking at our database. And I was asking my colleague in the Ambon Army if it was possible to identify a new one to study. You know, you are a PhD student, you are craving to try to find a shipwrecks. And actually, Jan told me, yes, why we can go back and try to relocate the Victoire. Actually, the Victoire was first discovered back in 1988. However, they did not save the exact coordinates, so they didn't have a GPS point, so the location was lost and the site was never been visited again, and this was quite a good positive aspect. So what they recall was just some landmarks as a visual reference. So December 31 of in 2021, we went back at site, and we were quite lucky because after 20 minutes of snorkeling, we found the shipwrecks. So this is what we found. So the wreck site is located in shallow, highly dynamic internal waters of Pointe Canonier in the north of the island, and a depth ranging between 1.3 meter to 4. So what we spotted was these rocks that was clearly that were not natural formation. And diving and surveying around, we found piece of wood sticking from one side of this stone conglomerate. And this was, we thought that it was actually part of the ship. So in addition to the wood, we also spotted several fragments of glassware scattered around the site. And so we thought that there was the wreck, it was quite well preserved under the stone, and we needed to start a proper survey and excavation. So the archaeological investigation of Victoire was made possible through the Mauritius Underwater Cultural Heritage MUCH project. That is a collaborative framework under a MOU involving the Department for Continental Shelf in Mauritius, Stanford University, and the Mauritius Maritime Conservation Society. Our fieldwork progressed in 2 phases, a survey in 2022, which identified the hull, and then a second phase was the actual excavation in February 2023. So before going into the water, for our survey, we spent some time doing archival research. We went to the National Archives of Mauritius. Here we found crucial documents, for example, the official declaration of the shipwreck, written and signed by the captain himself. We searched for information about the ship's past, and we discovered that the Victoire first arrived in Mauritius in 1803. We traced her journey. So she left France, made a necessary stop in Rio de Janeiro, and finally reached the Indian Ocean. So, and then we had no information about this ship before 1803. So we suppose it was a French ship, especially because Mauritius, Ile-de-France at that time, was a French colony. We have other local information about the type of the ship, but it's quite not consistent. Some says that is a 220 tons ship. Another is mentioning that is a small lugger. So it's not quite the same old information that we find on the type of the ship. So, but thanks to the captain official declaration, we know exactly what happened during the ship's last voyage in 1804. So we know that once the Victoire arrived in Madagascar, a mixed cargo was loaded onto the ship, and this cargo included enslaved people as well as goods like heifer, bullocks, and rice. So this is what the captain mentioned, just this. We don't have any other information of other materials. And then please keep in mind on this. So on her way back to Mauritius, the ship was spotted and chased by a British fleet and tried to escape. The captain decided to go close to the reef at Ponto Canonier, because as the name said, Ponto Canonier was the point where there was cannon, where there was a battery from the French. So the captain tried to find support, but it looks like from another piece of archive that people didn't understand the signal that the captain sent to them, and they didn't respond. They were sleeping, or a lack of personnel was present at that night. So what happened at the end? The ship became completely stranded, and in the chaos, the crew disembarked the enslaved people. They threw them overboard, as well as they threw the cattle. So the enslaved people managed to reach the shore and were, but on the other side, the cattle unfortunately drowned. So finally, to avoid being captured, the captain decided to set on the ship on fire. So after relocating the shipwreck, after founding this archival research, we returned to the site in July 2022. And we start our first official reconnaissance survey under the MUCH project. And during this phase, we did not move any stone or excavate. We just only used non-intrusive techniques. So our main goal was to map the site and understand the environment around it. So from the boat, we mapped the depth of the water using an echo sounder, and we created the bathymetry, and underwater we took measurements and thousands of photos to create a 3D model of the site through the photogrammetry. We also tried to deploy a little ROV, and so this is the information and the mapping that came out. As you can clearly see, the red part shows the amount of the ballast stone. After that, and you can see here from this red dot is where we spotted the wood. So after this preliminary first reconnaissance in February 2023, we did the first excavation. So we selected two squares because we had only 2 weeks of work. So we decided to open 2 areas to examine the extent of the wreck and inspect both sides of the ship. So, but this service was not just about data. A very important part of our work was teamwork and capacity building. So we used this survey and this site because it was quite easy to swim and to dive, because it's very close to the shore and shallow water, to train local stakeholders and colleagues from Mauritius in maritime archaeology techniques. it was a successful, and they enjoyed so much. We had a very 2 beautiful weeks working together. And here we are. So after removing the ballast stones and sediment, the frame and the wood of the ship were uncovered, and we were quite happy because you never know what you find on the ballast. Maybe it was not actually a shipwreck, so we were happy about that. Also, I have to say that for this excavation, because we are working with the government and with this Department for Continental Shelf exploration, we made a plan on an environmental plan, how to excavate, to try not to disturb too much the environment and the coral around it. So we try to be less destructive as possible, as archaeology is. So here is another view of the frames and the boat that came out from one square. So as I said, that to remember before was I was talking about the cargo and the declaration of the capital, we recovered so many pieces of glassware. We were so fed up at one point. In just this little square, we recovered more than 2,700 pieces of glassware. So because we had so many materials, also we decided to carry on with the capacity building training, and we did a week of cataloging, documenting, drawing, photogrammetry. So we involve other stakeholders to also, they helped me a lot with organizing all these materials. So, but at this point, during our excavation, we didn't just find a glassware. On the other side of the side, we discovered a well-preserved plate of copper sheeting, and one of them in particular was almost completely intact. Here we can see here. So at first, this plate really confused us, if I have to be honest. When we clean it, two things emerged. First, the British broad arrow mark, which indicates Royal Navy property. So, and the date, August 1801. So the date matched the time frame of our shipwreck, but we ask ourselves, why does a French ship has a British copper on its hull? So are we really working on Victoire? We were quite confused at the beginning. So we went back to the archives on the website, on the numerous open source websites that you can find online. And then we start a conversation with the copper expert, Jean Bijman, and we reconstruct the early life of this ship. So at the end, we actually were working on the Victoire, but the Victoire was captured by the British was in 1797. Here you can see, and used as a Royal Navy fire vessel. The British probably put the copper on it, and then after the service sent it back to the French at the end of 1801. So this is not just a small detail. The Victoire was probably sent intentionally into the Indian Ocean to trade, because having a copper plated hull was a huge advance. So you have to think that copper protected the wood from, very well destructive ship worms, and made the ship much faster. So in those years, this was so important that many insurance, for example, company would not even insure your voyage without the copper protection, especially for a ship transporting enslaved people. This means to have a ship very fast and protected. And this is very important because it is considered essential to survive the journey and maximize the profit. Especially a lot of insurers, as I said, they wouldn't have insurance your boat if you didn't have this copper sheeting. So after that, what the next step was analyzing this huge amount of glassware that we had, especially because it was not reported on the archival information. So from this 2,700 pieces of glass, we selected around 108, the more representative, and sent them to the Field Museum in Chicago to be analyzed by experts in collaboration with the Dr. Modi Trivedi at Stanford University. But that was one of my mentors there. And they identify 6 different types of glass. I have to say that an article is in process of being written on this analysis. And this result also came alongside with trying to find out why we have a broad arrow copper sheeting on a French ship. So, and the most amount of glassware were English lead potash glasses. So we were very confused at that point. We had also other type of glass that, as you can see, we have the soda lime Venetian inspired glasses, but they were the Bohemia. We have the high lime, low alkaline. And then the expert told me that this English lead had the highest level of lead in a glass, that usually it's around 40, and in this kind of glass were around 60, so high that they told me, please, if you have to handle, be careful, because they're broken and they be underwater, they can irritate your hands, or can be dangerous. So, but then after that, we have a 6th group that is the bangles. We have found 6 glass bangles. Interestingly, it turned out that there is one of these, the black color, closely resemble, align closely with the assemblage study in the West and Northern India, particularly at the site of Indore. So they said that this is one of the first Indian Bengal found outside Indian continent. And this is interesting and unique find because the Victoire glass assemblage reveals a complex picture of colonial era glassware. So, but the biggest surprise was was also the condition of the glass. So we think this is a colored composition, such as recycling glass, indicating that this material was transported from Europe to Indian Ocean, likely for initiating local production. Maybe they were not mentioned by the captain because they were lying on the top of the ballast zone. They were part of the ballast. So we don't know, maybe because it was not something that he traded or he bought it. I don't know. There was not glass production in Mauritius up to the beginning of 20th century. So we don't know where this assemblage was going and where it was coming from. So I threw my question there to you. If anyone has never known something similar, I'm very happy to discuss with you. And finally, some of these glass pieces showed clear fire damage, which proves once again the captain set the ship ablaze. Well, after the glass, we looked at the wood. We took 4 samples from the hull and sent to the specialized laboratory in France. And the main body and the ribs were made of European oak, chosen for its extreme strength. The wooden nails was made of European pine. And finally, the outer layer of the ship was made of teak from Southeast Asia. So teak is a fantastic wood for shipbuilding. It resists water, stops destructive shipworms, and protects the metal part from rust. But we had the teak only on the side that we found the copper sheeting. So we didn't find teak, and this doesn't mean maybe there was also the other side. But we have teak from only one side of the ship. Finally, we analyzed the ballast stones that cover the shipwreck. So we select 6 of these stones and sent them to France for petrographic and X-ray diffraction analysis. So what we discovered is that these were rare rocks, and crucially, bibliographic research confirmed that these specific rocks originated south of the island of Mayotte. I will show you later where is Mayotte, and are completely absent from the geology of Madagascar. So the stone from Mayotte, how did the stone from Mayotte end up on a ship departing from Madagascar? So this actually shows how active the trade networks were. Probably we are thinking that the other ships likely brought these mayotte stones to Madagascar and left them there. And when the captain loaded his massive light cargo of enslaved people and heavy cattle, he needed more ballast to balance the ship. So he picked up this specific stone from the beach or from the dock. And also we found among these stones a beautiful crystal rock, which was highly valued commodity in the Indian-Ocean trade. So now let's zoom out from our small excavation trench and look at the entire world. So this map is very interesting because shows you that without our archaeometric and scientific analysis, we wouldn't have known the true story of the ship. So the analysis allowed us to trace exactly where every part of the Victoire came from. If you look at the map, we can see a highly globalized network. The copper sheeting and the majority of the glassware came from Great Britain, but also from Europe in general, as well as the wood to build the body of the ship. But then we have also teak wood on the outside, and then the unique glass bangle also that they were all coming from India and Southeast Asia. And finally, as I said, we have the ballast stone and the crystal rock, the ballast stone from Mayotte and the crystal rock from Madagascar. But the most tragic part of this story is that the enslaved people, the cattle and the ballast stone and the crystal, so this single shipwreck shows us that the Indian Ocean slave trade was not an isolated local business. It was a massive, complex global economy. So, but while our analysis can tell us exactly where the wood and the glass came from, unfortunately, we don't know exactly where these enslaved people on the Victoire originally came from. We know from the archives that they were loaded onto a ship in Tamatave, in Madagascar. But Madagascar was a massive exchange hub, so the people forced onto the ship were not necessarily from there. They could have been captured from anywhere in Africa, such as Mozambique, Swahili Coast, or deep in inland regions. So, and then brought to Madagascar to be sold. So the historical documents just list them as a part of the cargo, along with the cattle and the rice. So this completely erase their true origins, their name, and their identities. So unfortunately, as an archaeologist, we cannot give a voice back to these people, but this is exactly why we need this archaeology. We need to remember this tragic event and provide the misinformation for a very important part of the history, Mauritius histories especially. So, as I said before, studying the Victoire is not just about understanding one single ship. This shipwreck was absolutely fundamental for my thesis because it gave me a baseline to compare to completely different period of Mauritius period, the legal slave trade and the illegal slave trade under the courier. So, as I said, to do that, I compared these two shipwrecks. However, this is an entirely new presentation. I don't want to go over, but I found just in less than 20 years, I found so many different ways to trade enslaved people while a ship was under French control and during the legal period. And it was a completely different story for an illegal slave trade. So in conclusion, to conclude, I want to emphasize that this marks only at the start of research into the slave trade shipwreck in the Indian Ocean, and especially in Mauritius. The data I've shared today come from a trench that covers less than 2% of the entire wreck. So this is just the initial phase, and it would be lovely and wonderful to secure additional funding to carry on excavation, because I think it's crucial to establish a complete archaeological record of the Mauritian slave trade. I will end here. And before I conclude, I want to extend my deepest gratitude to all the institutions that made this research possible, and especially to Jan Bonarmi. And thank you, everyone, for your time and attention. I would now be very happy to open the floor and answer any question.
Thank you very much, Stefania, for that very interesting presentation, and it's a very nice complement to the article that you wrote in IJNA, so I hope people do go and visit your article.
Thank you.
And for questions, it's a bit difficult. I'm not in my normal home office, so I am having a little bit of challenge here trying to find, and Mark just put in the chat, the link to your article. But let's see here if Mark can help me find the chat. Here we go. There we go. The chat, the questions and answers. There we go. Are there any questions we can?
There aren't yet from the audience, but I have one. If I can maybe sneak mine in to start with. I think at the beginning you said I think you showed a map where you had a table. You had 11 documented slave shipwrecks, and you had 2 known locations already, and the Victoire became the 3rd. Did research go down an avenue whereby other potential sites for the other missing ones came up? And because it kind of links to the end where you said about future research, and not just there, but also on the other potential ones that are known to have been linked to the slave trade.
Yes,
there we go.
We did.
That's the one.
Yeah, yes, we did. After the Victoire, we tried to locate the Meduse, the first one, because it sank very close by Meduse at the beginning when we were looking at. We are not sure that we were on Meduse on Victoire, but then thanks to the copper sheeting, we know that is the Victoire because the Meduse is much earlier. And we have another site close by that we call potentially Meduse, but I think it's part of the Victoire actually. For the reason I would like to go back and see if it's the same wreck, because it stranded, it's set it blasted. So probably one part is one side and the other is another. I think it's 200 meters. I think even less. So probably it's the same wreck. Then when my colleague Jan von Army was digging on here, they got information about another ballast stone mound close by, and it was the Saint Jacques, as you can see on the picture above of Saint Jacques. Above a courier, there is the Saint Jacques. So we have another information, and probably there is another shipwrecks there, and we have to verify it. And that's it. In the south, it's very difficult to find shipwrecks. The sea is very rough, it's very deep, and it was quite easy in the north because you are inside the reef and the shallow water. So at least we are hoping for other two slave shipwrecks, probably even the active that is also around Cuillère and Saint Jacques. It can be, there is the potential to be found. Dragon, of course, no, it's been lost at sea, so very difficult in very deep water. And the other, we have other 3 shipwrecks that we have information only from archival research. We don't have any other fishermen come and say, probably there is something. So we probably lost them completely up to now, I don't know, up to now. So we're hoping that for 11, we can find other 3, let's say, in the future.
Hopefully. If I can steal the floor again, Vina, just for a second one, just at the end, and it's in your paper as well. I noticed you said that only 2% of the wreck was investigated. Do you mean 2% of the known wreckage, or do you mean 2% of the? Oh, because how do you know how much where the other 98% is, or do you mean 2% of the ship? If the whole ship was intact, you'd have only looked at 2%.
So no, I mean just the 2% of the ballast stone that we found and we agreed, let's say, has been investigated.
I see. So the ballast mound is visible on the surface.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
So we don't know actually if this is the entire site. Is, as I said, maybe it's this one part, and the other is the part that we thought that it was made use. That the research is still ongoing. But the part that we gridded, we calculated is just the 2%. Open one tranche 2x2 is just the 2% of what we know up to now.
Yeah. Thank you.
I was wondering, Stefania, when we're talking about these global networks that existed in the late 18th and early 19th century, which is really not that long ago, we're talking about also the large part of the cargo, as you mentioned, was a silent cargo that we don't have much evidence for. And I'm wondering if you worked with local Mauritian colleagues, but I'm wondering also in the local community, if there's not some sort of historical narrative or community narrative about this shipwreck. Are there any stories or local, I don't want to call them legends, but narratives around this shipwreck and what happened to the enslaved cargo?
Yeah, so for this shipwreck, no. Much of the local, let's say, stories are more connected with Lemoore, the south bit of Mauritius, of the nice picture that I show you at the beginning. A lot of horror history is connected with emancipation, escaping from slavery and hiding, maroonage, all these things. So we didn't have any local information about these shipwrecks. But I have to say that while I was working on recollecting all the information on the career, Professor Richard Allen, that is one of the most famous historian in the Indian Ocean, found, and while he was working for his research, he found an account where a little boy called, I don't remember, Edward, I believe, has been caught years and years after, and he said that he was coming from a shipwreck that sank, and then they hidden him in a forest. And this is the and then they say he said the name of the captain, so we cross-reference, and it was actually one boy that was saved from the Courier shipwreck. Because as you can see from this picture, Victoire sank in the north because he was approaching the island and going to the main port that he was here. So it was officially in trading. Why this other group of shipwrecks, they were performing illegal activity, so they were going on the other side of the island and try to disembark these people in a hidden bay. So, and after they've been chased by the British and they disembarked enslaved people, I have to say not just because they were caring for these people, but because they were a huge asset and they were bringing a lot of money. So they hid them in the forest, and this guy survived, and it's been interviewed in a few years after, and they say, yes, I remember that I came in Mauritius through this ship and it sank, and they hid me in the forest.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, and I'm sure there's other. That's very interesting to have that type of narrative of the survivors, because that's otherwise there's so little documentation that is known from these slave ships that are now starting to be investigated in Mauritius and in other places too. I have a question about the other cargo, and you showed very well how all the analyses, the scientific analyses that are done around your archaeological projects, from looking at the wood type to the geological studies for the ballast stone, and also for the glass and the content of the lead in the glass. And as you said, it's up to, I think, 60% lead content. And that seems incredibly high. So I'm wondering how if it was dangerous for you to handle it as an archaeologist, how dangerous was it for people to drink out of these glasses or use the glass with such a high lead content?
Yeah, I think the professor told me just because they were all broken. So if the item, it was entire probably, but they didn't know really the dangers of the lead. So they went try to achieve the purest transparent glass. And to do that, they added this huge amount of lead. So we are writing this article because It's the first, let's say, research that shows this huge amount of lead, because especially during this historical period, not and then finding this kind of glass in a context that is known, they usually don't go through analysis. So we needed to understand where this was coming from. So we took the chance of analyzing, and it was quite surprising of the composition of this glass.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting, I think. I'm going to, again, Mark, you might have to help me here to see if there's any other questions from our colleagues.
There aren't, unless I've disabled the chat, but I've got some thumbs up, but I don't have any, but I'm afraid I don't have any questions.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see any other questions on mine here as well. So, apologies, I'm a bit remote today, and so have to do this on my phone. But
Can I
I'd
ask
like
one
to.
more?
Oh, of course.
I was wondering if there were any consequences faced by the captain or the crew when because they set it alight and they came ashore. But do we know anything about the aftermath after they came ashore? Did they eventually make it home?
We don't know anything about. We know that the captain went 3 days after to do the official verification, and then they were asking, why did you take so much? Usually you should have done the same day or the day after. So he took 3 days before going, and he said because he needed before to sort out some stuff. So for the Victoire, no. For the Courier, we know that the captain escaped to Réunion. There is a long trial. We have so many, because then he was one of the most famous illegal trader in the ocean and Mauritius. He knew very well all the way and how to navigate the water. He said that he waited the full moon to start entering the Mauritius water, so he was completely see very well the reef. And we think that he intentionally stranded the ship aground, to be caught and to conceal all the trace of illegal activity. And then he had a huge network, so he managed to escape, to took a boat and run in Réunion and hide there, especially because Réunion was back to French. So under French control, the slave trade was still possible. So he was hidden in Réunion. And after a little bit, he decided to come back and collaborate with the trials and give so many information about how he operated, how he was transporting enslaved people, how the ship was modified to try to crowd as much as possible people. And so we have all this huge information that it's pure gold to read and understand the trade. And cross-reference with archaeology as well.
Yeah, that's hugely valuable. Yeah. Well, if there aren't any other questions from our audience, and I don't think there is right now, Mark, I don't see any, but
Me neither.
Okay, all right.
Well,
we do, yeah, we have several thank yous and thumbs ups, which is great. And just to remind everyone again that Stefania's article is open access until the end of July. So please do visit that link that Mark put in the chat earlier. And this webinar will also live online on IJNA's YouTube channel, so you can always revisit it if you want to. So we'd like to thank Stefania and Mark. Are there any other final words that you'd like to add?
Just a big thank you to the Honor Frost Foundation for making this experience possible. And so on behalf of the NES, our presenters, and the HFF, thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your hot, sweaty day.
Yes, it is in some parts of the world. Yes. Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you, Stefania.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.